What would your day look like if you were born a peasant in medieval Europe? You'd probably wake up before sunrise, maybe around 4 or 5 a.m., if you were lucky enough to have a warm bed to sleep in. If not, you might be sleeping out in the open with your family, exposed to the elements. Your first task would be to get yourself ready for the day. This included cleaning your teeth, combing your long flowing locks, and putting on the only set of clothes you had. You'd probably eat whatever you could find to eat. This could be something simple like bread and cheese, or maybe some leftover meat from the previous night's dinner. After breakfast, it's time to get to work. Men, women, and children all worked in the fields from dawn till dusk, planting, harvesting, or tending to the crops. Work was never ending on a medieval farm. There were always crops that needed tending, animals that needed feeding, and endless chores to do around the house. Luckily, when you weren't working in the fields, you could take care of other important tasks, such as collecting firewood, fetching water, or taking care of the livestock. The medieval peasant diet consisted mainly of grains, vegetables, and fruit. Meat was considered a luxury good and was only eaten on special occasions. Lunch would probably consist of more bread and cheese, or maybe some vegetables and fruit. Dinner would likely be the biggest meal of the day. The peasant family would eat whatever they had available, which could include meat, vegetables, bread, cheese, beer, and ale. After dinner, the family would probably sit around the fire and chat. Maybe they'd tell stories or jokes or sing songs. The men might discuss politics or the latest news from around the kingdom, while the women gossiped about everything else going on in their lives. Children would play at the feet of their parents, listening intently to every word that was said. Sometimes the family would pray together before bed, asking God for forgiveness for their sins and for protection during the coming night. The men, women, and children would then retire to their beds, falling asleep to the sounds of crickets chirping outside their windows. Your day as a medieval peasant is never truly done. Even if you were lucky enough to have a warm fire to keep you company through the cold nights, there would still be noises to keep you on edge. Wolves, bears, and other wild animals could wander through the village looking for food. To make things worse, robbers and bandits weren't unheard of. Most villagers slept with a weapon under their bed or by their side just in case. And even though you might think it's easy to fall asleep with all this chaos going on around you, that wasn't the case. The life of a medieval peasant was tough. They lived in fear of the next famine, war, or plague. They also had to deal with the constant threat of poverty, disease, and death. But despite all these hardships, they were a strong and resilient people who somehow managed to endure through it all. So now we want to know, what would your day look like if you were born a peasant in medieval Europe? Let us know in the comments below. Medieval peasants wore simple clothing made from natural materials such as linen, hemp, and wool. Men typically wore tunics and hose, while women wore dresses and aprons. Peasants also wore wooden shoes or sandals, but some may have worn leather boots or stockings. Their clothing was often patched and mended, as it was expensive to buy new garments. During the Middle Ages, peasants didn't own many possessions. Their homes were usually small and made of wood or stone, and contained little furniture besides a table and chairs. They did, however, own the clothes on their back, the tools needed for their trade, and any livestock they owned. Peasants were generally not wealthy, but they did have some money. They earned this money through their labor on the land they worked, as well as through the sale of any goods they produced. Some peasants were able to save enough money to buy luxuries such as spices, wine, or candles, while others were forced to borrow money when times were tough. Overall, the possessions of a medieval peasant varied depending on their location and wealth. However, they generally owned the essentials needed for their survival and a simple life. Peasants were an integral part of medieval society. They were the backbone of the economy, producing the food and goods that sustained the population. In exchange for their labor, they received a portion of the profits and were given a place to live on the Lord's land. Without the hard work of peasants, the rest of society would have been unable to function. The average lifespan of a peasant in medieval Europe was around 35 years. This was due to a number of factors, including disease, war, and poverty. Life expectancy varied depending on location and time period. For example, during the Black Death pandemic, which lasted from 1346 to 1353, it is estimated that up to half of Europe's population died. This, of course, brought down the average lifespan significantly. However, even during better times, peasants generally had a shorter lifespan than members of the nobility and clergy. Many factors contributed to the low life expectancy of peasants, such as lack of access to healthcare, poor nutrition, and dangerous working conditions. Disease was also a major killer of peasants. They were often crowded into small villages and towns, which made it easy for diseases to spread. Additionally, peasants had limited access to clean water and basic medicine, which made them more susceptible to illness. Finally, war and poverty also took a toll on the lives of peasants. They were often caught in the crossfire of battles between kings and queens, and they suffered greatly during times of economic hardship. The typical medieval peasant family consisted of a married couple and their children. The father was usually the head of the household, and he was responsible for making sure his family had food and shelter. The mother was in charge of cooking meals, cleaning clothes, and taking care of the children. Families could be large, with some peasants having as many as 10 children. Children began working in the fields at a young age. They helped their parents plant and harvest crops, and they took care of the livestock. When they weren't working, children played games, sang songs, and told stories. Entertainment was an important part of life for medieval peasants, even though they didn't have much money. Peasants would often participate in festivals and celebrations that took place in their villages. These events gave them a chance to let loose and have fun. Peasants also enjoyed simple pleasures, such as eating, drinking, and smoking. They liked to eat hearty meals that consisted of meat, vegetables, and bread. They also liked to drink beer and ale, which was often safer than the water. Peasants would sometimes attend religious services, but they didn't have much contact with priests or other members of the clergy. Religion was an important part of their lives, but they didn't have much opportunity to learn about it. Overall, the life of a medieval peasant was not an easy one. They were poor and uneducated, and they lived in constant fear of starvation, war, and disease. However, they were also a strong and resilient people who managed to survive for centuries. Despite the hardships they faced, they found ways to make life bearable, working together to produce the food and goods that kept society functioning. They also found ways to have fun and enjoy life, even in the darkest of times. For more interesting videos, stay tuned.